What happens when one of Hollywood's most revered actors sits down for what should be a routine morning show interview, only to find himself under fire from a host with a hidden agenda? What you're about to witness is the moment Denzel Washington had enough of the media's games and decided to fight back, live on national television. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. It's a masterclass in standing up to journalistic bullying, leaving viewers across America picking sides. The morning started like any other at the Good Morning America studios in Times Square. Denzel Washington, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit, settled across from George Stephanopoulos on the familiar living room, set millions of Americans tune into every weekday. The cameras rolled, the red light blinked on, and what followed was anything but routine. "We're back with Academy Award winner Denzel Washington," George began, his voice smooth and practiced. "Denzel, thank you for joining us this morning." "Good to be here, George," Denzel replied with his characteristic warm smile, easing into the plush chair, expecting the usual questions about his latest project. "Your new film tackles heavy themes: social justice, systemic inequality," George said, his tone shifting subtly. "Some critics say you're using your platform to push a political agenda. How do you respond?" Denzel raised an eyebrow but stayed measured. "Storytelling has always been about reflecting the human condition, George. When you see injustice, when people struggle, that's not political, that's human. Art holds up a mirror to society." "But don't you think celebrities should stay in their lane?" George pressed, leaning forward with a pointed edge. "You're an actor, not a politician or policy expert." The studio audience, previously quiet and attentive, sensed the tension rising. Denzel's smile faded. "Stay in my lane," he said slowly, his voice steady but firm. "I've been in this industry over 4 decades," he continued. "I've played presidents, preachers, everyday people fighting for dignity. Just because I make movies doesn't mean I don't understand the human experience." George countered sharply. "When you comment on police brutality or institutional racism, you're venturing into areas where maybe you don't have all the facts." Denzel straightened, hands clasped. "Facts, George. I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York. I've seen things, lived experiences you may never know. When I speak about inequality, it's not from a script, it's from life." George tried again. "Surely you can see how some viewers might feel Hollywood elites preaching about social issues comes off as, well, preach." That's when the shift happened. The warmth in Denzel's expression hardened into steel. "Hollywood elite," he said quietly, every word weighted with decades of experience. "I came from nothing. My father was a minister. My mother worked multiple jobs. I put myself through college. You want to talk about elite? Let's talk about the real elite, the ones who control narratives, who decide what stories are told and which are buried." George shifted uncomfortably. "I think you're being a bit dramatic, Denzel." "Dramatic?" Denzel let out a short, humorless laugh. "You know what's dramatic, George? Sitting here being lectured about staying in my lane by someone who hasn't walked in my shoes. You want to question my right to speak about injustice? Fine. But let's be honest about what this really is." The tension in the studio was palpable. Crew members exchanged glances, realizing the interview had spiraled far from its planned course. George attempted to regain control. "Look, I'm just giving you a platform to address criticisms." "A platform?" Denzel's voice rose slightly, his legendary composure cracking. "George, you invited me here to talk about my work, a film I'm proud of, addressing real issues affecting real people. Instead, you're trying to diminish my voice, putting me in a box labeled, just an actor. That's not journalism, George. That's something else entirely." The studio audience was silent, riveted, witnessing Denzel Washington take a stand, live, unfiltered, and unforgettable. This wasn't the typical softball interview viewers expected. This was raw, unfiltered conflict playing out in real time. George cleared his throat, feeling the weight of the moment, but doubled down. "Denzel, I think you're misunderstanding my questions. I'm just trying to present the perspective some of our viewers have expressed." "Some of our viewers?" Denzel's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward. "George, let's cut through this. You're not presenting viewers' perspectives. You're presenting your perspective. You're using this platform to try to discredit me, and frankly, I'm tired of it." George's face flushed, but he pressed on. I'm a journalist, Denzel. My job is to ask tough questions. Tough questions. Denzel's voice sharpened dangerously. A tough question would be asking me about the research I did for this role, about the families I spoke with who live these realities. A tough question would be about the craft, about the responsibility of telling these stories. What you're doing is trying to silence me, and that's something entirely different. George shifted uncomfortably, his media training clashing with his personal agenda. I'm not trying to silence anyone, but when you make sweeping statements about systemic problems in America, don't you have a responsibility to be balanced? Balanced. Denzel stood slightly, his 6-foot frame commanding the space between them. The cameras adjusted instinctively, capturing a moment of television history. George, you want balance? Here's balance. I've spent my career bringing dignity to characters who look like me, who come from where I come from. Heroes, villains, everything in between. But when I speak about real issues affecting real people, suddenly I need to be balanced. The studio was silent except for the hum of the cameras. Even production assistants had stopped to watch. You're twisting my words, George said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Denzel's tone cut like a razor. When was the last time you questioned a white actor about staying in their lane when they spoke on political issues? When did you demand balance from someone who doesn't look like me? George's mouth opened, then closed. The question hung impossible to answer. That's what I thought, Denzel said, gaining momentum. This is exactly what I mean. A successful black man speaks about injustice, and immediately he's told to stay in his lane, to be balanced, to consider other perspectives. But those standards, they don't apply to everyone, do they, George? I think you're being unfair, George protested weakly. Unfair. Denzel let out a bitter laugh. George, you know what's unfair? Having your credentials questioned every time you speak on something that matters. Being told your life experience doesn't count because you've been successful. Being lectured about balance by someone who's never had to fight for respect the way I have. The camera caught George's face, a flicker of uncertainty, the first glimpse of someone realizing this interview was unraveling. I've covered politics for decades. George tried, attempting to regain control. You've covered politics, Denzel repeated, dripping with disdain. From behind a desk, from the safety of your newsroom, I've lived it. There's a difference between understanding something intellectually and understanding it in your bones, in your soul. The tension reached a breaking point. Denzel was no longer the calm, diplomatic actor who had sat down for a routine interview. He was something more, powerful, unyielding, dangerous. You want to know my credentials? His voice rose, building to the moment viewers would talk about for months. I'll tell you. I've been black in America for 70 years. I've been successful in an industry that didn't want me, that told me I wasn't leading man material. They told me I should be grateful for whatever scraps I got. I've raised black children in this country, worrying every time they left the house. Those are my credentials, George. What are yours? George was visibly struggling now, sweat forming on his brow, despite the studio's air conditioning. Denzel, I think we should move on to discussing your film. Oh, now you want to discuss my film? Denzel's voice rang with incredulity. After 10 minutes of trying to tear me down, suddenly you want to talk about my work? George, this is exactly what's wrong with media today. You bring someone on under false pretenses. You attack their character, their right to speak, and then, when they fight back, suddenly you want to change the subject. The studio audience was riveted. Some nodded in agreement, others shifted uncomfortably, but no one looked away. I wasn't attacking your character, George insisted, but the conviction was gone. Then what would you call it? Denzel shot back. You questioned my intelligence, my credibility, my right to speak about experiences I've lived. If that isn't attacking my character, what is it? George's carefully constructed TV persona was cracking. I'm trying to do my job here. Denzel, your job. Denzel's voice exploded, barely contained fury simmering beneath every word. George, your job is supposed to inform the public, not tear down guests who speak truth to power. Your job is to ask real questions about real issues, not play gotcha games with people who've actually lived the experiences you report on from your ivory tower. The studio fell silent. Production assistants, camera operators, even the makeup team had stopped, mesmerized. "I think you're overreacting," George muttered, but desperation leaked through his tone. Overreacting? Denzel stood fully, his presence dominating the set. "George, let me tell you what overreacting looks like. Overreacting is inviting someone on under the guise of discussing their art, then ambushing them with loaded questions designed to diminish their voice. Overreacting is using your platform to perpetuate the very systems of oppression my film is trying to expose. That's overreacting." Every camera captured Denzel's transformation, from gracious guest to unstoppable force. His voice carried decades of experience and battles fought in an industry that tried to limit him at every turn. "You want facts, George? Here are some facts." His tone hardened, authoritative. "Fact 1, I've been making films about the human condition for over 40 years. Fact 2, I've used my platform responsibly, telling stories that matter. Fact 3, I've earned the right to speak about whatever I damn well please, not because I'm famous, but because I'm a human being with a brain and a conscience." George tried to interrupt, but Denzel pressed on. "Fact 4, you invited me here today not for a real conversation about important issues, but to put me in my place. Guess what, George? I don't have a place that you get to define. I don't have a lane. I'm supposed to stay in just because it makes you comfortable." The audience was captivated. Some nodded in agreement, others stared, stunned by the raw power of his words. This was no longer entertainment, it was truth spoken in real time. "Denzel, please," George pleaded. "Please what, George? Please be quiet. Please know my place. Please not make you uncomfortable by pointing out exactly what you're doing." Denzel's voice built to a crescendo that would echo through television history. "No, George. I won't be quiet. I won't stay in a lane you draw. And I sure as hell won't let you use this platform to perpetuate the ignorance and bias people like me have been fighting against our entire lives." George glanced desperately toward the control room, hoping for intervention, but the producers knew they were witnessing history. "This is the real tragedy here, George," Denzel's voice dropped, dangerous and magnetic. "The real tragedy is that you have this incredible platform, this chance to make a difference, to ask questions that matter, to elevate important conversations. Instead, you choose to tear people down, to silence voices that need to be heard." The weight of his words hung in the air like a verdict. "I'm not trying to silence anyone," George muttered. "Then what do you call this?" Denzel gestured broadly, at the set, the cameras, the entire moment. "You bring me on your show under false pretenses, to question my character, my intelligence, my right to speak, and call it journalism. That's the real story, George. That's the truth. You attack my credibility. You question my right to speak about issues I've lived through, and you do it all while hiding behind the pretense of journalism. That's not journalism, George. That's character assassination dressed up as morning television." The studio went completely silent. Even the crew, who normally moved with quiet efficiency, had stopped everything to watch this extraordinary confrontation unfold. "And you know what makes it worse?" Denzel's voice carried the full weight of his moral authority now. "You're doing this to someone who has spent his entire career trying to bring dignity to the screen, trying to tell stories that matter, trying to use whatever influence I have to make the world a little better. But that doesn't matter to you, does it, George? All that matters is putting the uppity black man back in his place." George's face went pale. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap, impossible to ignore. "That's not what this is," he protested weakly. "Isn't it?" Denzel's eyes bore into him like lasers. "Then explain to me, George. Explain to everyone watching why you felt the need to attack me from the moment I sat down. Explain why questioning injustice makes me dramatic. Explain why using my platform to speak about important issues makes me political. Explain it, George, because I'm genuinely curious to hear your reasoning." Silence. George opened his mouth several times, but no words came. His tactics were exposed, laid bare for everyone to see. "That's what I thought," Denzel said quietly, but every word carried across the studio and into millions of homes. "You can't explain it, Because there is no explanation except the one we both know is true. You saw a successful black man speaking truth, and you decided he needed to be put in his place. Here's a news flash for you, George. I don't have a place except the one I make for myself. He stepped closer, the cameras capturing the full force of his presence. I've been fighting battles like this my entire life, George, in Hollywood, in America, everywhere I go. And you know what I've learned? The people who tell you to stay in your lane are usually the ones most threatened by what you have to say. The studio was so quiet. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. George looked like a man who had stumbled into a fight he was entirely unprepared for. So here's what's going to happen. Denzel continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect on movie sets and in boardrooms around the world. I'm going to finish what I came here to say, and you're going to listen. Maybe, just maybe, you'll learn something about what real journalism looks like. George nodded weakly, defeated. My film is about people who refuse to stay in their lane, George. It's about people who see injustice and decide to act, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's dangerous, even when people like you tell them to mind their own business. And if that makes me political, if that makes me dramatic, if that makes me anything other than what you think I should be, so be it. Because I'd rather be authentically myself than a sanitized version that makes people comfortable. Denzel straightened his jacket and looked directly into the camera, addressing viewers at home. To everyone watching, don't let anyone tell you to stay in your lane. Don't let anyone tell you your voice doesn't matter. And don't let anyone use their platform to diminish who you are or what you stand for. He turned back to George one final time. Thank you for the lesson in what journalism shouldn't look like. It's been educational. The camera held on George's stunned face as Denzel walked off the set, leaving behind a moment of television that would be replayed, analyzed, and discussed for years to come. The host sat exposed, defeated, a cautionary tale of what happens when you underestimate the power of truth spoken with conviction.